There we are. Well, look, thank you everybody for having me today, for inviting me along to talk. I'm going to mainly focus on our minimum digital living standards project, though I'll be quite happy to share quite a few of our prior publications on digital inequalities and our kind of general approach to the question of digital inclusion and exclusion. And in this talk, I'll also probably talk through about why we think this is really important, etc. I may jump out of these slides and pull up a few other things now I'm thinking about it along the way, just to add a few more points. So the Minimum Digital Living Standards Project is a project funded by the Nuffield Foundation, if you know them as a funder of kind of social welfare facing research. It's also funded currently by the Welsh Government, because we barely started this project and the Welsh Government decided they wanted a minimum digital living standard for Wales. So we've done additional work to kind of stress test this in Wales, but also talk to the Welsh policymakers and citizens about how this would work as a policy tool in Wales. Partway through the start of the project, it became clear there's a question as to whether the information we were getting from parents or carers was necessarily reflective of what young people would think, especially the kind of secondary school age children, about what they thought their digital needs would be, because, you know, maybe generational change. So that came through from our advisory panel for the project. So very kindly, Nominet funded us to look at children. So if you don't know who Nominet are, Nominet own .uk. So if you've got an email address that ends .uk or .wales or .scotland, etc., Nominet own that bit. And so basically, every time people get a new email website address with a .uk bit on it, they get a few pounds. You know, they look after that. Now, they are a non-profit, and they've take that funding back into things like cybersecurity around health and into looking at the digital needs of young people. So they funded the young people research component. We are fingers crossed hoping that the Scottish government, nothing like a good bit of healthy competition between devolved nations, are going to ask us to do a Scottish version as well over the next year. And currently, the project's focused on households with children, that we will be expanding that, you know, maybe after we've done the Scottish work, to other household types, say older adults without children, younger adults without children. So there we go. As I said, it's a big team. So I'm leading the project, but it is a massive group effort, including colleagues from Loughborough University, from the minimum income standards team there, from the centre that looks at social inclusion and poverty at Loughborough University, and we have heavily borrowed from their methodologies for the first part of the project. Charity called Good Things Foundation, you may have heard of. They support digital inclusion work across the UK. City University, because one of my postdocs, Anna Kami, got a lectureship down there, and she's part of the team now. The postdoc team at Liverpool of Alex Singleton, Alex is one of the professors here at Liverpool, and he's helping with the geographic bit. Jim Franco, Jeanette, and Rebecca are the postdocs on the team here. Supriya was at Liverpool. She's our economist. She's just moved to University College Dublin, and we have a commercial research survey provider in critical research. So that's the team, to give them that's the overall team that's delivering this. So why are we doing this? We're doing this because in the digital inclusion space, you can measure digital inequality in so many different ways. You know, you can say, does someone or do they not have a laptop, a PC, a tablet, a mobile phone, whatever? You can say, how good's their broadband? Have they got broadband? You know, and if the digital inclusion literature, there's a lot of talk about issues of rurality and so on and broadband access. The reality is actually far more complex than that. It costs as much to wire up a deprived social housing block, tower block in Manchester, because we just finished some work for Andy Burnham on this stuff in Manchester, as it does to wire up the same population in a remote village in Wales, for a whole variety of different reasons, legal, material, practical, and so on. So you can look at access, levels of access, differences in skills, difference in levels of use, how often you use digital technologies, etc., and so on, different types of use. It's not really part of this talk, but I can talk you through maybe if you want later on. There's some issues there about, for instance, very narrow users. Young people don't go into secondary higher education who only really do social media, right? They don't do lots of other types of activities. So they're not having the same digital experience as, say, graduates who will be using large screen devices, laptops, and so on as part of their work and their experience. Very different types of use, and so on, types and levels of use. And then there's questions about what benefit you get from being online. The more you're online, the more skills you've got, you accumulate benefits. One of my real concerns about digital is it's an amplifier of inequities. To them is given more. If you are online, you can order cheap stuff, you can get cheap food to your house, you've got readier access to health information, you've got readier access to information to support your child, to educational materials, etc., and so on. But what it does is it amplifies, and especially where we shift it to being very digital, and at that point cut off communities and groups, and then amplify those inequities. And on the other side, there's hazards, potential risks and harms. We know, say, from the research done by Lloyds Bank, because Lloyds Bank does a big digital inclusion survey every year, that people with low digital skills are much more likely, they're less likely to be, they have less exposure to online harms because they're not online as much. But they are far more at risk of a very negative consequence of an online harm. Because if, say, you've got a low income and you get a financial scam, it has a bigger impact on you than, say, a wealthier household. Right. But what's really scary is that they're far more likely to be scammed more than once. So online harms are not equally distributed. And what you find is for higher income, higher digital skills households, they might get scammed, but they don't tend to get scammed again. Right? And the consequences are. And we also know from the work we've done on a different Nuffield funded projects around digital and data literacy that low digital skills and low levels of digital use also correspond very closely with exposure to misinformation, disinformation, including health misinformation and disinformation, and likelihood to engage with that content. So that's a very complex list of things. How do you talk to a policymaker? Policymakers want a number. We know from talking to DCMS, DCMS and DCIT, other government agencies, they like the do you own a tablet or not kind of question, because it's dead easy to measure. And if you dish out a load of tablets, you can say 1,000 more people are online and hey, it's all sorted. The other stuff is a bit messy. So we've been trying to find a way of capturing that complexity in a measure that's not a binary yes, no, but is a statement of basic digital needs that you can then use to say, well, does this family meet it? Does this community meet it? Or where are they falling short? What policy intervention should we do? Rather than it being the smorgasbord that people can pick and choose from. And if you look at government stuff at the moment, and I'll put the links in the chat later, the House of Lords report, which has been very damning about the lack of digital inclusion in Britain, which was just recently published, and the rather limited government response, which basically says, let them eat SIM cards. It is of that kind of French Revolution-esque, they've got nothing, well, give them SIM cards. It's really not a great response. So what we're doing, we're doing a different approach. We're calling it minimum digital living standard. It builds on Loughborough's minimum income standards methodology. Now, if you know their work, what they do is lots and lots of deliberative focus groups with families, households of different types, saying, what are the material goods and services you need or you think a family should have as a minimum, so that such that below which they will start to suffer aspects of poverty and deprivation. So it's not a minimum, like their minimum income standard isn't enough income to eat. It's enough income such that you do not suffer aspects of deprivation. So it's more than the living wage, and it's an awful lot more than the minimum wage. But that's the definition of minimum, is it's the point below which, as it were, the consequences and harms of a lack of income start to come into being, as agreed by, as defined by households themselves, not by policymakers or anybody else. So we've taken that methodology and asked the same question about digital. That's the nature of the project. So it's not just a list of kit and broadband speeds, but it includes a list of kit and broadband speeds, right? It's consultation, deliberatively based. It's not policymakers and academics looking from the outside saying, what should households have, right? So it essentially asks, what's the digital goods, services, skills that deliver a social, work, family, educational, entertainment, community, civic minimum for a household in a digital society? That's the kind of question. So where are we at? This is, in fact, we've finished this last bit in Wales as well, because Welsh is now finished. In fact, it went up, the reports went online today. So the Welsh reports went online today. Again, I can share those in the chat later. So we've done the deliberative field work. We've got our minimum standard. We've done a national survey of 1,600 households, surveying every single person in the household in terms of the components of the minimum digital living standard. So that's nearly 6,000 respondents, parents, parents, other adults, children of all ages in the household. We've done a load of work with stakeholders representing key communities, such as people, disabled people, people in higher levels of poverty, people with specific educational whatever needs. We've done a set of works, not with necessarily community members for themselves, but with the stakeholders for those communities, to talk about how this standard might work for them and so on. That's just currently getting written up. We've done something similar in Wales in 2 phases, and we've also interviewed families below the MDLS in Wales to understand the impacts on them of not having a minimum digital living standard. The final bits are the quantitative stuff from our survey, and we're also going to use some clever geodemographic mapping methods to kind of work out which lower super output levels are likely to, areas are likely to be above or below or on a graded scale or something of the MDLS, so we can see where in the UK there is a greater or lesser challenge. So, like I said, key things to recap: household level approach, what the public, households themselves, identifies digital needs based on deliberative focus groups that define the standard. So the first stage, and this is the bit that's been done by the Loughborough colleagues, and it's their methodology, was to talk to all household types, not just ones with kids, but all household types, people from, single retired person living on their own, young person living on their own, families with children, families without children, etc., and so on. And for them, through 3 rounds of kind of focus group discussions, feeding the results from one to the other, come up with a verbal definition of what a minimum digital living standard should be. And as I explained in a moment, the next step is for families then to take that and say, well, what do we need to meet that? So they came up with a minimum digital standard of living includes, but is more than, having accessible internet, adequate equipment, and the skills, knowledge, and support people need. It's about being able to communicate, connect, and engage with opportunities safely and with confidence. So that's what they came up with as a definition, that a digitally included household, a household that is not suffering some of the consequences of digital exclusion, of not having the appropriate digital skills, would meet that definition. So then we went through 3 more rounds of multiple focus groups. So this isn't 3 more focus groups. This is 17 more focus groups for stages 2, 3, and 4, including some with young people alone, to check whether the parents were saying anything sensible about digital needs. So this is now households with children only. And so at each stage, people try and draw up a list of goods, services, skills that they would need to meet that verbal definition. And then that's taken through to the next round of focus groups, where they check all of that, they raise concerns, we have a look at it, we do a bit of expert input and things, and so on, because of course sometimes people are not really fully aware of things like what broadband speed is this, whatever, and so on. So we reflect on what they've said and feed that back in, and then we have a final group to sign off on the whole thing. So interestingly, the households came up with 3 layers that really do match, but not quite in the same way, onto some established stuff from the literature. So that at a base level, there's a set of digital goods and services. And that at the next level, there is a set of practical, what they call practical skills, what we would probably call functional literacies, functional digital literacies, the ability to use the devices, the abilities to do the practical stuff with them. And then a third layer, which was for them about managing digital risk and understanding digital society things, what we might call critical skills and literacies. So the full thing in all its completeness is there, and probably very hard to read on a screen. But essentially, we've got a list of devices and technologies. Though we're going to be slightly modifying these post survey and also post recent work on minimum income standards, the practical skills and the digital society type skills. So if you look at, if you can read this, the definition of home broadband was very interesting from the families. It wasn't, we need 67 megabit. It was enough sufficient reliability and speed to support all family members to access the internet at the same time. So it's kind of not like a number. It's, and it's relative to the state of technology at the moment. Then there was mobile phones and data. So then they argued for an entry-level smartphone, a really, really basic smartphone, the most basic Android smartphone, plus certain levels of data, one for each adult and secondary school child, with additional data if they've got preschool or primary school children, so that the parents can use the device to do other things when out on the move, let the kids watch some television or something, or download content or something they needed to do while on the move, etc. But that mobile phone and data presupposes internet at home, because it presupposes behaviors like downloading content onto mobile devices before leaving the home. It assumes that a number of activities can be done on the device at home, therefore you don't need as much data. A laptop per household, as in parents, and first child. And after that, if you've got school-age children, you need additional devices so that multiple people can use devices at the same time in the home to allow for education, healthcare, other activities all going on separately or whatever, entertainment, and so on. Headphones, because a lot of people don't have private spaces to do digital things in the home. Post-COVID, we're all working at our tables or, things in the front room or something, but also school children wanting to do homework quietly in a busy household with small space, or people wanting to watch entertainment while others are working around them. So devices to allow a little bit of privacy whilst using digital. A smart TV or access to smart TV type services to allow access to cultural content. And the two that are possibly going to disappear off this list are the smart speaker and the gaming subscription, because in the minimum income standard, people redo their minimum income standards work every year. These have fed through from that. Families are now saying things like the smart speaker is not a requirement. It was a replacement for radios that used to be in the minimum income standard. And now people just say, I do audio on, if I've got a device, I do audio on my phone, whatever. So access to audio content, which with a smart speaker / radio, DAB radio was there for, has gone. And in terms of gaming subscription, the issue we've got is that a lot of parents don't understand what that is. And so they've got children who've got gaming subscriptions because of the nature of the device they own, and so on. And when we dig under the actual focus group work, it's more about the capacity for children to game across the internet, to play games with their friends. And these days, a specialized gaming subscription is not necessarily the way forward. So this is kind of one of those subtleties between the children's understanding and the parents' understanding, and so on. So for the quantitative work, we're just going to assume if people have got a laptop or a gaming device, etc., and so on, or a big PC, that they've got access to that capability. Practical and functional skills, you'll see the lists there. They've also got little coloured dots on them. Those coloured dots are about where the parents and the children talked about at what point in education should you start to achieve those skills, and should education be delivering those skills to you. And what's interesting is how this differs from prior research and government policy is there's quite a few things in there in terms of the skills that are not in the essential digital skills framework that the government uses. And they're not in some of the literature on digital literacies. They're things like managing your data so you don't run out of it by the end of the month. Yeah, knowing about where free Wi-Fi is, knowing about, therefore, having to be able to set up devices on different Wi-Fi environments is a key skill if you've got low data, and so on. These things really came through in about how families manage and so on. You may or may not be aware, but households that are 100% off the internet, have no broadband or mobile sort of data connectivity, went up over the last year from 2.2 million to 3 million, according to Ofcom. And in lots of other work, it's quite clear that cost of living crisis, people are cutting back on access to tech, access to digital services as a way of saving money. So people are moving in the wrong direction. What we do know from some of the kind of anecdotal stuff from qualitative work is that those people with higher digital skills are getting savvy about how to use that to stretch the budget. People with low digital skills just made the decision to cut the £20 a month off the internet connection, because that's just a simple way of not paying, or their mobile phone subscription is a simple way of not paying for things. So there's some things in there that are different than the government skills framework. So I've talked through that list, so I won't go over that again. But essentially, those functional skills split into 3 categories: using digital devices themselves, as artifacts, how to engage online. And I don't mean like how to behave online, but how to use tools to be able to engage with others online, whether that's the ability to use social media or the ability to use online gaming or whatever, some set of skills that allow you to do the functional bit of engaging online. But lastly, and inversely, something that people with lower levels of broadband data equipment access have to have greater skills at, so kind of almost an inversive type thing, is the ability to manage and monitor the devices, the ability to check data levels, to be able to connect to different services and so on. So there's an interesting element here about, skills for different contexts. The more critical skills, what the families took as understanding digital society and digital risk, very clear ones around managing security, making sure devices are secure, internet secure, and not just the settings, but the appropriate behaviors to keep their devices, their data, their family safe. Protocol and appropriateness for interacting with others, making decisions about friend requests, making decisions about content you may or may not want to engage with, dealing with problematic behavior online, that kind of skill set. And lastly, dealing with information. So, for example, health information, being able to verify the veracity or the quality of health information that you may be receiving would be, an example in that space. So the ability to make some assessment of who is sharing, giving you data, information, etc., and also what information you should and shouldn't share. And as we found in the work we did on digital literacies and data literacies, there's an awful lot of anxiety out there amongst everybody, adults, children, the population in general, about what data is taken from them, what data is used, what you should and shouldn't share, what the consequences are of sharing or not sharing information. There is in our other study, there's a lot of the focus groups, there's words like scary, disturbing, worrying, frightening, horrible, when it talks about issues around platforms using, abusing, or sending you information that, misinformation or whatever, and having no control over that. So there we go. So, as one of our respondents said, you've got to have all of this, so, if we take an example of laptops in education, you can have those things, but you need to be able to use them as a means to an end, to achieve online lessons or the completion of homework. If you've got hardware, but you still can't use it to do what you need to do, well, this was just post-COVID, whether to order a PCR test or whatever, then are you included? You have to have accessibility, you need it all. And that's what we think is beneficial about the MDLS. It's a model of digital inclusion that looks at the household, not just at the individual, and it looks at the holistic needs to be part of a digital society. And we think the household's really important as well, because other research points out that when people are stuck, they primarily go to their local social network. I mean, physical social network, not, Facebook, though they might use that as well or whatever. But they go to colleagues and friends and family for support. An older adult struggling with how to, and we've got this in focus group data, struggling with how to access health services, how to book an appointment with a GP, do a prescription, will go to daughter, grandchild, friend next door, So having a picture of a household as a whole is, I think, important, because if the household as a whole lacks skills, then people have got nowhere to go to for an immediate help. Whereas in a household where a proportion of the people have got enough skills, the household can solve the issue of booking the medical appointment or booking, the school parents' evening or whatever it might be that they're trying to achieve. So how are we theorizing all of this as social scientists? A couple of theory slides. Is we're taking a view from Amartya Sen and Nussbaum's work on capabilities. I don't know if anyone knows this work. Amartya Sen is a Nobel Prize winning economist. He's done most of the work that they do is in development economics. So economics in in developing countries. And in terms of trying to understand the impacts of things like poverty and inequality in those contexts, they use this idea of capabilities, and what we find is nice about this is that it includes a well-being component, but also a living a life you value component. So it's not a measure of or an understanding of inequity in terms of somebody decides that you should have this much or that much. It's what is it that individuals, households are trying to achieve to have a life they value, to achieve the thing, as it says, the things that they have reason to value, and what are the barriers and processes involved in delivering that. So what they mean by capabilities is that people want to achieve functionings, or functions in their life. So that could be, and is often, things like good healthcare or good education for their children, or in kind of very deprived circumstances, access to food and water or whatever. It could be, access to entertainment. You want to be of access to cultural engagement. So these are things that they value and they have reason to want to achieve. So they want to achieve the function of ensuring your child has a good education. To do that, they need the capability to do it. And the capability consists of a whole chain of things. It contains material goods, skills and knowledge, opportunity, and so on, right? The less you have that, the less freedom you have to deliver that function and the less capability you have. So we would argue, therefore, that digital inequalities or lack of digital skills or lack of access to digital technologies are key barriers to and or amplifiers of inequities in other domains. For example, if you want to achieve well-being, you want to achieve health and well-being, suddenly those digital skills, access, etc., become either enablers of, they give you capability or even greater capability than you had before to achieve that. So I can now get a health app to monitor my chronic condition. I've got COPD, I've got breathing issues. I mean, I don't have, but someone might have breathing issues, etc. They can go and monitor pollution levels or other things online and make decisions about going out of the house and so on. It gives them agency and it helps with their well-being and it increases their freedom around their well-being and their agency. Where they're missing, people then cease to have the capabilities or their capabilities are considerably constrained. So we're thinking of the minimum digital living standard, as about whether or not the household's got the digital components that would give them the capabilities to achieve the kind of life they want to achieve, the things they value, and so on. But we're not saying, therefore, there's such a thing as digital capabilities, if you follow what I mean. It's like there's quite a few of my colleagues talk about digital capital, and I'm a Bourdieu person. But you read our papers, we like Bourdieu if you know your sociology, and there's economic capital, which is based in the material, and there's social capital that's based in interpersonal networks, and there's cultural capital, which is knowledge and education and so on. If we can have digital capital, then we can have washing machine capital, etc. And there is an argument for the capital that is domestic technologies and what they might achieve, but it's not the model, So same here, we're not saying, oh, there's specific digital capabilities. We're saying in a modern digital society, if you want the capability to achieve good healthcare, if you want the capability that will allow you to achieve the functioning of good education for your children, if you want the capability to ensure the functioning of access to cultural content and cultural engagement, digital is a component of that. If it's missing, it limits your capability to achieve that thing. So that's how we're thinking about that. So that's the minimum digital living standard, how we think about it, how we've conceptualized it. In the context of Wales, what we've done is we've talked to stakeholders about how would you use this as a tool to help deliver in digital inclusion? How should the Welsh government use it as a tool? We've talked to households below the minimum digital living standard. And you won't be surprised, of course, to find that one of the things they've really come up with is cost, the cost of the equipment and the cost of the skills, affordability, and so on. But you'll notice affordability is not in the definition of a minimum digital living standard, because affordability is a barrier to it, not a component of it. In the same way that the minimum income standard is an income that should allow you to not be subject to issues of deprivation, right? Affordability, as in having an adequate wage, is the issue being discussed, not the thing within it. So both skills and affordability are, key barriers. Also, local and the ability to engage with support, local community, etc., that have got the digital skills is a barrier for many people in many communities and so on. So we know that there's quite a large proportion of households in the UK that are missing both the technical and the critical skills. Now, before we got our survey results, we were messing around with Ofcom data. And Ofcom data was telling us in various different ways that probably about 40% of households with children are below the MDLS. Now, we know from our other work that about 25% of households in the UK are led by adults who've got very limited digital skills. Loughborough knows that 70% of it's not on the slide here, but 70% of single parent households are below the minimum income standard. So that's a very large proportion of households these days. And that kind of all household types, about 40% of them with children are below the minimum income standard. Joseph Rowntree will say that 27% of households with children are in absolute poverty, not relative poverty, but absolute poverty. So we're expecting quite a high proportion of households to be below the minimum income standard. So this is the bit where if I just stop sharing for a moment and share again in a second, we can do some hot off the press, and then I can stop. So this is very early days stuff, not necessarily for repeating until we've got this properly written up, but a little taster of where we've just got with the survey. I don't know what it's doing there. Share screen. There we go. Can everyone see that? So the answer is 49.6% of households with children. And we immediately went, oh my God, that's so high. How could we justify that? But when you walk through the figures for poverty in households with children, when you walk through the figures on educational attainment of households with children and so on, and we know, for example, that getting a university higher education is a major predictor of high levels of digital skills and digital engagement. It's one of the crux points, and if Angus Deaton's work in the States, so The Economist, on deaths of despair, which sounds like a completely different topic, but one of the bigger predictors of things like opiate, weight, other deaths in the US is higher education. Going into higher education, no matter what your initial background is, massively reduces your risks for all of those things. And one of the issues there he talks about, it's access to information, its ability to use information, ability, as well as being wealthier, etc., to make better decisions. So I'm kind of not surprised that higher education is a major break point for digital skills. And when we look at that, most of adults and children seem to think that secondary school kids have got it best and they've got a greater level of digital skills across the board. But that, still you're talking 20 to 30% of households don't have either the functional or the critical skills. So it does paint a slightly bleaker picture than you might have believed. And it's a point I've been making for years and years, that we think of ourselves as a very digital society, but that's often the people living in it, not the people not living in it, who are experiencing that. And that gap of experience is quite pronounced. I won't whiz up the last slide, but basically to say that the next steps are to write up those stats fully and completely, but also to map MDLS across the UK. There we go. Thank you very much. All right, I've stopped.